Hi, peeps. You're listening to She's My Cherry Pie, the baking podcast from the Cherry Bombe Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jessie Sheehan. I'm a baker, recipe developer, and author of 4 baking books, including Snackable Bakes. Each Saturday, I hang out with the sweetest bakers around and take a deep dive into their signature bakes. My guest today is Domenica Marchetti. Domenica is a cookbook author and food writer. She's the author of 9 cookbooks, all of which focus on Italian cooking, and all of which have dessert chapters. Her most recent one, Italian Cookies, Authentic Recipes and Sweet Stories from Every Region, was released earlier this year. Domenica's recipes and stories on Italian home cooking have appeared in multiple publications, including Fine Cooking, Elle Decor, and The Washington Post. She also hosts culinary trips to Italy and cooking classes and writes a fantastic Substack. She joins me today to talk about her journey into the food world, from making Italian Christmas cookies with her mother as a child at home to studying journalism and becoming a newspaper reporter before transitioning to developing recipes and food writing. She also talks about her new gorgeous book and about how she landed on the idea to write an entire book about Italian cookies. And we're so glad she did. Then she walks me through her Canestrelletto di Torriglia recipe. They are flower-shaped butter cookies from the Liguria region in Italy. I loved learning about how these cookies revived a town's economy and how just 4 ingredients and lots of technique can result in such extraordinary cookies. You're going to love listening to my chat with Domenica, so stay tuned. You can find today's recipe at cherrybombe.substack.com. If you love our show, did you know that we publish a free baking newsletter every Saturday to correspond with each new episode? Check out Cherry Bombe's Substack to subscribe to our She's My Cherry Pie newsletter today, where you'll get exclusive insights about my guests on the show, their recipes, and other fun baking news and tips. Plus, check out our other free newsletters, where you'll find the latest food and fashion news and browse through our recipe catalog, which is filled with some really great recipes. While you're there, consider becoming a paid Substack subscriber to get access to exclusive content from Cherry Bombe magazine, invites to our monthly Bomb Squad meetings with industry pros, and discounts to events like our annual Jubilee Conference. A subscription is just $6 per month or $55 a year. Learn more at cherrybombe.substack.com or click the link in our show notes. Let's chat with today's guest. Domenica, so excited to have you on She's My Cherry Pie and to chat Italian cookies with you and so much more.
Hi, Jessie. Thank you for having me.
So can you please share your earliest memory of baking something? It can be you baked something alone or you baked something with your mom or your sister.
Probably my earliest memory is not necessarily of baking per se, but of being sat down at the kitchen table with my sister to crack piles and piles of walnuts and hazelnuts and other nuts, the almonds that my mom used in her holiday baking. So that was my first foray into baking, and it was a tedious task, and it was only many years later that I realized there was a reason she wanted to start with the whole nuts in the shell, and that's because they're fresher. But anyway, I didn't mind it so much. It was kind of nice to sit there and do a task. I was trying to think about early bakes that I did, and I have to say, one that really comes to mind is my dad used to clip recipes out of the New York Times for my mom to make, and one that he clipped out was this recipe for Scottish shortbread. So that was one of the first things I started baking, probably when I was a preteen or so. It had rice flour in it, which I thought was really interesting. It made the shortbread really nice and crispy. And so I made that quite often for a while.
Obviously, everything I care about has to do with baking, but I would love to hear an early cooking memory, which I think maybe involves gnocchi and ravioli.
Yes, my mom was in the kitchen a lot. She was a stay-at-home mom, sort of. She did substitute teaching when my sister and I were little, and then when we were older, she taught French and Italian at various schools in our area. But she was home and made dinner every night. She made homemade pasta fairly often for Sundays and holidays. And so she'd be on one side of the counter rolling out the pasta dough and maybe filling it with meat filling for ravioli or a cheese filling. And then my sister and I would be on the other side of the counter. And once she cut out the ravioli, we'd have our little forks and we'd seal the ravioli. She taught us to roll out gnocchi, which, it's kind of fun when you're a kid. You have this little ridged gnocchi board and it's like Play-Doh, basically. Those are the first cooking memories that I have. And so I guess it's not a surprise that I ended up doing a pasta book because that was so much, so important in my formative years.
What about your earliest memory of eating a baked good? Like it could even be from the corner store, but some early memory of something sweet.
I have a couple of memories. One was not far from our house, up the street and up the hill, there was an old Dairy Queen. And
I love Dairy Queen.
Know.
A twist with a dip is my absolute favorite.
So I would get this weird combination of their chocolate soft serve with cherry dip.
I think that's kind of Black Foresty.
Yeah. So I loved that. And I also loved their dilly bar, which was vanilla.
I know. I know we both have worked for the Washington Post. I did a dilly bar for the Post, like a homemade dilly bar.
Oh, my gosh. I don't know how I missed that.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to look that up. That sounds amazing.
I made it like in a 9x13, not with sticks,
awesome.
but based on, I love hearing about Dairy Queen.
And then the other one I have is an Italian memory. So my mom had 3 sisters who never married, and for many years they shared an apartment in Rome. There was a pasticceria, a bakery that my Aunt Elsa would always go to. Italians on Sundays, they don't often bake. They go to the pasticceria. If they're going to somebody's house, they go to the pasticceria and pick up either pasticceria fresca, which is pastries, or pasticceria secca, which is cookies. But my aunt would take us down there and we would pick out a sweet. And my favorite was 2 giant meringues sandwiched with fresh whipped cream and then drizzled with bittersweet chocolate. And when I was little, they were enormous and they were so tooth-achingly sweet. But I love meringues and I loved these so much. So I would get that every summer. And years later, I went back as an adult and I went to the pasticceria and I looked at their sandwiched meringues and I thought, they're making them smaller. This is shrinkflation or something. So I mentioned it to the woman behind the counter and she said, well, your hands are probably not the same size.
Oh, that's so cute. That sounds so delicious to me. Was it like a mallowy meringue that was soft in the center or more like crispy?
It was more crispy, maybe a tiny bit of mallow in the center. And then it just stayed sandwiched really nicely with this thick, fresh whipped cream. And, they just had it in the display case. I don't know when they would sandwich them together because they were always fresh and delicious. And then just a nice drizzle of bittersweet chocolate. And so we'd get that. I mean, they were very messy, obviously, but they were so delicious.
It sounds incredible. I also know, I think an early fave baked good eating memory were your mom Gabriella's pastry pockets on Christmas morning.
Yes, the calzonelli, yes.
With honey and almonds.
Yeah, so
gosh.
Not very, about as far as you can get from an American chocolate chip cookie, right? So this was a fried dough, pasta frolla, which is a basic pastry, kind of a shortcut pastry, but sturdy enough that you could fry it. And in Abruzzo, which is the region that my family is from, the typical filling is chopped nuts like walnuts or almonds, a very rustic grape jam made with Montepulciano d'Abruzzo grapes, and then cocoa and not very much sugar. And then the dough wasn't that sweet either. So you would fill this strip of dough and you'd cut them out like ravioli into half moons. And then she would fry them and, shake lots of powdered sugar over them while they were still warm. And that's what we had on Christmas morning. And so I did get acclimated to those Italian flavors early on.
So you definitely grew up in a food family.
Oh, yeah.
In New Jersey, Italian parents talking about the next meal while you were finishing the first. And your mom was a big cook. But I read somewhere that she, and I just wanted you to unpack this for us, that she kind of looked down on Italian-American food because she'd grown up in Italy. Does that mean the Americanization of Italian food she looked down on?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I would say, Yes, and I'm hoping I don't offend anybody. She grew up in Italy. She was born and raised there, and she grew up in the city of Chieti, which is in Abruzzo. And if you're not familiar with that region, because it's lesser known, I like to say it's mid-calf on the boot that is Italy. And it extends from the Apennine Mountains out to the Adriatic coast. It's a beautiful region with diverse cuisine, mountain cuisine, lamb and mutton, pork, hearty ragu. And then as you get towards the sea, you've got the rolling hills, the wine, olive oil, wonderful vegetables, and then all the seafood of the Adriatic coast. So she was, she came to the U.S. in the 1950s, met my dad on a blind date in New York City and decided to stay. But she did not grow up in a typical Italian-American family. And for her, that was kind of like a foreign thing. She didn't have the same traditions or habits or upbringing. So she was very much an Italian who remained Italian, even though she ultimately spent more of her life here than she did over there.
What's the Americanization of the Italian food that she didn't like? What's an example of it?
I think one thing is over-saucing pasta, giant meatballs, lots of oregano, which in the Abruzzo region you don't see so much. You see that in Calabria. Yeah. Oregano is ubiquitous. It's less aggressive than the oregano that we find here in the U.S. It's floral, it's dried in bunches, and you just kind of like sprinkle, you just sort of shake the branch of oregano over your sauce or whatever you're making. And, less garlic. I think she felt that Italian-American cuisine tended to overdo things.
I get you.
Which it does, but sort of, does so happily. And I think when it's done well, it's really wonderful. It was unfamiliar to her.
Understandable, yeah.
Hi, everybody. It's Carrie Diamond from Radio Cherry Bombe. The next big Cherry Bombe event is Farmers and Makers, and it's taking place in Paso Robles, California, September 25th to 27th. It's a weekend of tastings, dinners, conversations, and special events in honor of the International Year of the Woman Farmer and the women behind what we eat and drink. Weekend passes are on sale right now at cherrybombe.com. The link is in our show notes.
So you spent a lot of time in the kitchen with your mom. Would you say you were in there more than your sister? Because I know a lot of the memories you write about your sisters there, too.
Yeah, I think we were both there equally. I think I was more into baking than she was. Pretty early on, I started to make pies. My dad loved fruit pies, so he was Italian as well, but he was born in Rhode Island, and his parents came over from Italy. So he was also a New Englander and loved things like lobster, loved fruit pies. And so pretty early on, I started making things like apple pie and blueberry pie, and Betty Crocker was the cookbook that I went to. My sister loved rice, Italian rice, and risotto. So I do remember her this one time making risotto when our parents were away. And she was adding cheese and butter, and it would melt and dissolve. And so she just kept adding more and more. And so she was kind of the queen of the rich risotto. She's a wonderful cook. She enjoys doing it as well as I do. But I think maybe when we were younger, I was more into the baking.
And I read that your dad would give you a cookbook every Christmas. Was that when you were little, or was that as a grown-up?
That was when I was older, as a teenager. Yeah. So he got me the Gotham, the restaurant here in Manhattan.
Oh, yeah. Gotham Bar and Grill.
Yes. And I still make their biscotti. They're so good. And then Union Square cookbook. Yeah. There are several others that he got for me over the years. But yes, he would plan these trips when we would go to Italy every summer. My mom, my sister, and I would leave at the end of the school year, and we would stay for the summer. And my dad, who had to work, would come over for a couple of weeks in July, and he would plan these trips. And they were really planned around food and wine. And I will say this is, the early 1980s, late 1970s, no internet, no Yelp, no Google. So it was all done through research, I guess probably through newspapers and magazines.
What about bakeries?
Yeah.
Like special, I guess the meringue was a very
the meringues
special
were
moment.
Yes.
When you were traveling in Italy.
Yeah.
You want to describe another item?
What's funny is that I would pay more attention to bread and, the old forni, the old bread bakeries where back in the day, pretty much every little town or hamlet had a communal oven, and people would bring their bread dough and have it baked in the communal oven. At our beach house, at the end of every summer, my sister and I would throw a party for our friends. And so my mom would make, I don't know how many pizzas, but she would make the dough, assemble it, and then my aunt would drive these unbaked pizzas to our local forno, and they would be baked, and then they'd bring them back, and that's what we would serve our friends. So it was more those memories.
As I alluded to, your mom and your sister and you baked cookies for the holidays. And I think there was a favorite nut cookie, maybe the hazelnut crescent,
yes,
which I think I read made you fall in love with Italian cookies.
Yes.
This was funny. The recipe is actually was from a German neighbor.
Yes, right. So I associate this is the hazelnut crescent my mom made every year. Along with the calzonelli, she made pizzelle, the waffle cookies. Those are from Abruzzo. And then she would make these hazelnut crescents, which were very buttery and melt in your mouth. And she would coat them with powdered sugar, and they were just like a dream to eat. They were so good. They were very toasty, not too sweet, and they really dissolved on your tongue. They were so good. But it isn't actually an Italian recipe. It was given to my mom by our German neighbor. I included the recipe in the book because I associate it with my mom and with Italy. And in fact, there are cookies in the north of Italy that are very much like that, because Italy's cookies are, like all of Italy's cooking, is regional. And so up in the north, you do find those sort of buttery crescent cookies.
What about the rustic wine cookies?
Yeah, those are wonderful, and those are a very southern type of cookie, central and southern Italy. So the farther south you get, you start to see olive oil in the dough instead of butter, and wine is introduced in the dough, and it adds this lovely fruity undertone to the flavor of cookies, and I think it also contributes to their crunch. And so these are lovely little cookies that are perfect for dunking in, dessert wine. Or my favorite thing to do is after dinner, if I still have a little wine left in my glass, I just get a little wine cookie and I dunk it. And that's like the perfect sweet. You don't need any more than that.
Yeah. And tell us about the gingerbread dolls or the gingerbread ladies.
Yeah.
Are they the ones with the three breasts?
The three breasts. So they are a variation on that. So my mom used to make these gingerbread dolls for my sister and me for Christmas, and she would use Betty Crocker's gingerbread dough. So I think Betty Crocker was her sort of guiding light for American cooking and baking. And she cut out the patterns herself, and it was a very basic sort of triangular girl pattern. And then she would make the hair out of gingerbread, and she would make these aprons and these sort of bustiers, and she would roll two little pieces of dough and make two breasts to put on these dolls, and then she would cover that up with, a strip of dough, a little scrap of dough, and she would bake these gingerbread ladies for us, and then my sister and I would decorate them. And years later, I found that pattern in her recipe box. And when I was working on Italian cookies, I came across a cookie from Frascati, which is in the hills outside of Rome. And Rome and Abruzzo are attached, so they border each other. So some of the baking and cooking traditions kind of, overlap. So this cookie was very much like my mom's. The dough was a much more old-fashioned dough. It had olive oil instead of butter. And it was kind of this weird gummy dough that would snap back. It took me a while to get a recipe that I was happy with. But I went to Frascati and found out that these dolls, they're sold in cellophane packages. They're sold around the holidays. They're basically more of a novelty than something you want to eat. When I went to pay for mine, the baker said, it's not very good.
Yeah.
And they give them the children to teethe on. But these women have three breasts, and the lore is that two were for milk and one was for wine to keep the baby quiet.
Yes.
So if you think you're in Frascati, which is known for its wine, that makes complete sense. So I included that recipe in the book, but I did tweak the recipe so that the cookies were at least edible.
Yeah. And it sounds like your sister was making risotto, you were making pies, so you did kind of cook and bake independently from your mom, even if she was around the kitchen early on.
Yeah, that's true. Now, she loved to be in the kitchen and she loved to cook. So I didn't necessarily make dinner every night. When I was a little bit older, when I was actually It might have been even when I was, late in high school or even after college when I was living at home and working at my first newspaper job. And she was working full time. So I would occasionally, I would make dinner for her and my dad and me. But she did love to be in the kitchen, and I would do stuff independently of her on the weekends. But she and I did love to experiment. So we loved making like Chinese dinners or Mexican dinners, and we would just get the taco shells from the grocery store and, that sort of thing. So they weren't authentic at all. But we had a couple of Chinese cookbooks. And, growing up in New Jersey, we would come to New York and go to Chinatown for dinner sometimes. We all loved Chinese food, so we would try to replicate some of these dishes at home. So we were all enthusiastic cooks.
Makes sense. So as you got a little bit older, still, I'm sure, doing Christmas cookies with your mom and your sister, but you were also starting to kind of bake from food magazines. You guys would make all of the cookies from Gourmet every year, Martha Stewart Living, Fine Cooking, where you'd eventually freelance. I love that. So there was like a bit of a transition into sort of, I don't know if you'd call them American, but less traditional Italian
Absolutely.
cookies.
Yes. And of course, even from early on, I loved things like chocolate chip cookies and oatmeal raisin cookies and ginger cookies and those soft, gooey American style cookies, which, when you're a kid, maybe are more appealing than the Italian style cookies. But we would have these marathon baking sessions right before Christmas. And my sister and I would pick up that December issue of Gourmet magazine every year, and we would go through it and decide which cookies we wanted to bake from that. And then eventually, like you say, Fine Cooking, Martha Stewart started coming out with their holiday issues. And so we would pour through those and pick cookies to make. And so we had this very eclectic cookie plate every year. And every year it was a little bit different. There were mocha pecan balls on that plate for quite a few years. Martha Stewart has this wonderful chocolate ginger crinkle cookie that is still my son's favorite. So I definitely strayed from straight Italian cookies. And once I started going to Italy regularly as an adult, and once I was writing cookbooks and paying more attention to the baking over in Italy, that I kind of found my way back to Italian baking.
Is the chocolate ginger cookie like the chewy chocolate ginger cookie it's chocolate with cocoa powder, and then there's chunks of chocolate, and then it has like ginger in 3 different ways?
Yes, that's it.
That is my friend Susan Spungen's recipe that she developed when
Susan's recipe.
Yeah.
That's right. I think I just figured that out recently. Yes.
That's an incredible cookie.
It is such a good cookie.
It is such a good cookie.
Yeah, well, she's a fabulous baker.
She is. She's incredible. So you were a journalist before you were a cookbook writer. You went to Columbia Journalism School, newspaper reporter, and then you kind of reinvented yourself as a food writer. And I thought it was interesting because you were pretty scrappy about it in the sense of like using your media contacts from your newspaper career to then kind of segue into, but what about a story about Italy? Or what about a story about this food? Tell us about that.
Yeah. So, yes, my dirty little secret is that I never went to culinary school or pastry school for that matter. I'm 100% a home cook and a home baker. And after college, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do, and I knew I wanted to do some kind of writing. So I ended up taking an unpaid internship with the Associated Press in their Rome bureau for a few months. And then I came back to the U.S. and started working at the Home News in New Brunswick, New Jersey. And I applied to Columbia for grad school. And so I started working as a newspaper reporter in Detroit after grad school, and then ended up in Washington, D.C., writing about the nonprofit world for the Chronicle of Philanthropy. And all throughout that, I knew I was not going to be a Woodward and Bernstein type investigative journalist. I would come home from work and I would just go through my cookbooks and read cookbooks and decide what I wanted to make for dinner. And so when I was living in D.C. with my husband and we had our children in pretty quick succession, I decided to leave my full-time job. And it was at that point that I decided to kind of reinvent myself and start writing about food. And so I pitched stories to editors and people in newspapers who I had known through my newspaper days. And that's how I got into food writing. Yeah.
So great.
Yeah.
I love that. So your books. You are very prolific, 9 Italian cookbooks, which I love. And what I really love is that you always include a sweets chapter. I think I read you said, like, you can't end a book on something savory. Tell us about that choice. And did you ever get pushback from any of your editors?
Yeah, I have never gotten pushback. So this happened when I was writing my first book, which was a little book with chronicle books called The Glorious Soups and Stews of Italy. Soup is probably my favorite food. I mean, pastina in broth was my first solid food, and it'll probably be my last solid food, when I have no more teeth in my head. But I did this soup and stews book for Chronicle, and it just seemed so weird to end it with like a stew recipe, and it was organized seasonally. And so I decided at the end to do 4 costate, so 4 tarts, 1 for each season. And I really liked the way that turned out. Chronicle liked the way it turned out. And so when I was working on my other books, I did a book on pasta, The Glorious Pasta of Italy, which was my third book. I also didn't want to end on a savory note. So in Italy, the word pasta is a generic term for dough. And I thought, well, okay, I'm going to make some sweet pasta recipes. And so that's how I ended that.
I love
book.
that, a fried sweet dough chapter.
Yeah.
I love that. All of your books have been savory, except this last book, Italian Cookies, and you also wrote a book about biscotti. I've only written one book that kind of leaned savory, and it was easier to write only in that then you have dinner when you finish recipe testing.
Yeah.
As opposed to like 12 cookies. But other than that, I mean, I'm a sweet person. I much prefer writing about sweets. But what about you? Do you kind of equal opportunity writer in terms of enjoying both processes?
Yeah, I think I am. I focus really on home cooking and home baking. And even though baking is a more precise pursuit, ciao biscotti was fairly easy because it's basically one cookie done many different ways. So that was kind of a fun little diversion. But because I've always loved to bake, I think it wasn't that hard to make the transition. But yeah, I do believe we did a lot more takeout dinners when I was working on this book because we did end up with all these cookies, and you can't really do that for dinner every night.
Right. Yeah, exactly. You got into the Italian cookies, as it were, of childhood as an adult, traveling to Italy for work and for pleasure, and you fell in love with a variety of cookies from the different regions, which is how Italian cookies, authentic recipes, and sweet stories from every region came to be. Can you tell us about how sort of tasting one cookie in one region on a trip led you to a cookie in another region, led you to a cookie and hence the book?
Yeah, it was really kind of extraordinary. I had been paying a little more attention to cookies in Italy. There's this lovely mountain town in Abruzzo called Scanno, and it is known for various things. It's a very beautiful traditional dress that women would wear for ceremonies and, weddings and various occasions. And you will still see them get dressed up sometimes. But it's just this gorgeous stone mountain town that keeps a lot of these old traditions alive. They're also known for their filigree jewelry and for bobbin lace called tombolo, made with these beautiful silver threads. But there's a little cookie bakery in this town that even if you don't know where it is and you just follow the little streets of the historic center, you will find your way there because the smell of anise and sugar and, just wafts out of this little bakery. And so I've been going there for about 15 years. And I think maybe that got me on the road to paying more attention to the cookies that I encountered. But it was in Genoa that the idea for this book was really sparked. I went into a bakery. I think I was taking some folks on a day trip, and I just wanted something to snack on in the van. And I picked up this packet of butter cookies, and I ate one, and maybe it was just the moment or whatever it was. It was this incredible butter cookie that was, crumbly and delicate and crispy and just had this purity of flavor. And I just decided I needed to know more about it. And this is where my journalism skills still come into play. And I just got in my car after the tour was over and, I had looked on the back of the package, saw where the cookie was from, and went there. It's a town called Torriglia. It's a pretty little town in the hills outside of Genoa. And I found this whole history and story behind this butter cookie. And a friend of mine said, well, you should go to Gavi, which is right over the border in Piedmont nearby. They have really good amaretti. They're my husband's favorite. So I went to Gavi and I found these lovely, soft, tender amaretti cookies. And they said, well, just down the road, there's Voltaggio, and they have their own amaretti cookies. And so I ended up traveling around this swath of northern Italy that is full of what I call cookie towns. And I had never seen anything written about that. These towns that are associated with specific cookies or cookies associated with towns. And at that point, I thought, okay, there's something here.
Yeah, so great. I love it so much. I loved learning this about the photo shoot when you were shooting this book. You baked every single cookie at home, put them in the car with your husband, and drove to New York City for the photo shoot. So you had no style. There was nothing. You didn't even have to use the kitchen, or were you guys rolling out? Did you have doughs that you needed to roll out once you got there?
Yeah, I baked I don't know how many dozens of cookies, and we put them in containers and put those in bags and drove them up to New York for the photo shoot. And the photographer is Lauren Volo, who's a wonderful photographer, and the stylist is someone you know well, Maeve Sheridan.
Prop stylist.
Yeah, so it was all shot in her studio. So I brought all these cookies up. I also brought up a bunch of doughs, and I rolled out and baked cookies. It was like a 4-day photo shoot, I think. They would just turned these cookies into these beautiful portraits. And I also want to mention Deborah Kim, who was the assistant stylist, who kind of gave every little cookie its glow up before it went in front of the camera.
So she was like your food stylist.
Yeah, she was. Yeah, so I made all the cookies. Deborah kind of made them look even better. And then, Maeve and Lauren did the prop styling and the shots. But they just have this way of conjuring Italy in this, flower district studio. There's also illustrations throughout the book, and those are done by a wonderful Italian graphic artist named Daniela Bracco. She also illustrates my weekly newsletter, but I knew I wanted her to be a part of the book. And so there are a few recipes that don't have photos, and they do have Daniela's illustrations, which I think is really wonderful.
Now we're going to talk about the Canestrelletto di Torriglia. It's a flower-shaped butter cookie from Torriglia. It's a butter cookie that actually revived a Ligurian town. You did a lot of research for this cookie, meeting Paola in Torriglia, who was known for her rich butter cookies. Tell us a little bit about meeting Paola. I love the story of the economy of these towns suffering. And so what they did to bring back the economy was to invest in the bakeries in the towns.
Yes.
It's so cool.
Yes.
Bakeries save the day.
Isn't that wonderful?
Yes.
That's such an uplifting story. So Torriglia is this beautiful little town outside of Genoa. It's maybe about 45 minutes outside of Genoa. And it's been known as a place that the Genovese would go to escape the heat of summer. So it's like a little resort town. And there's some pretty little villas. But it's very small. It's about 1 kilometer long. It's got one main road. So you come in from the hills, you enter town, you drive up, and then you leave town and you're in the forest. It's beautiful. But like so many towns across Italy, they have seen their populations dwindle over the latter half of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century as people have gone to the coast or to big cities to look for jobs or even have left Italy. Italy has lost a lot of people looking for work. And so when I went to Torriglia that first time, I learned that this cookie dates back to the 15th century. It's got this long, long history in the town. A few decades ago, maybe the late 1900s or early 2000s, the people in Torriglia decided to create just kind of like a marketing program around this cookie. And so they came up with an official recipe and they just started promoting it. They have an annual festival every June, and it brings people from all over the region. And there are about 8 or 9 bakeries in town now that are devoted to not just this cookie, but mainly devoted to making the Canestrelletto di Torriglia. And what's special about it is that it is essentially 4 ingredients: flour, sugar, butter, and egg yolks. And with those 4 ingredients, the cookie has this purity of flavor and this incredible texture that I mentioned. It just kind of crumbly, melts in your mouth, tender, but sturdy enough. And so when I was there, I went into a number of bakeries and talked to a few of the chefs, but I spent most of my time with Paola Rosazza Battore, and her family has owned a grocery in Torriglia since the 19th century. I think it was opened by her grandfather. And it's called Alimentari Novella, after her mother. So her mother used to be the baker, and now she is the baker. So she told me how important this cookie has been because she bakes the cookies all week long. Her husband, a couple of times a week, goes down into Genoa and distributes them to alimentari and little groceries and shops around the city. And that is how these bakers, are thriving now. They distribute these butter cookies all over the region. And they've become, I think, famous beyond Liguria. I know that there are a lot of recipes on the internet now. I think there's a recipe in Ben Mim's book, Crumb, for Canestrelletti. And so they've kind of, jumped their border and they've become quite popular. And so I went to watch Paola bake her cookies. And she didn't share the recipe with me, but she let me watch her bake. And it was through watching her that I figured out that it's all about the technique in getting the texture for these cookies.
What's the technique?
It's the way you mix the ingredients in the mixer.
Let's get into it.
Yeah.
So first things first, we're going to separate some eggs. Should the eggs be cold to separate since it's a little easier to separate when cold?
I always separate them when cold, and then the whites go back in the fridge because they're not used at first, and then you let the yolks come to room temperature.
We're going to put the room temp yolks and some granulated sugar in the bowl of a stand mixer fitted with the whisk attachment. Beat on medium-low at first and then on high for 4 to 5 minutes. What texture are we looking for after that 4 to 5 minutes?
You're looking for a very aerated, almost fluffy texture. The color should be very pale yellow, like a cream color. And it's shiny, too. And then when you take the beaters out, you'll see that it's aerated. You can see that kind of raggedy interior a little bit.
Or like the ribbon when you...
Well, it's a little bit thicker than that.
The ribbon?
Yeah, it's a little bit thicker than the ribbon. So, yeah.
We'll begin to drop 2, I love the specificity of this, drop 2 1/2-inch cubes of unsalted butter that's at cool room temperature, 2 at a time, beating to incorporate each time before adding any more. For you, what's a cool, you say it's 65 degrees, but what's cool room temp? Like an indentation of your finger?
Yes, you can make an indentation, but the butter's not shiny or glossier. It hasn't gotten to that greasy stage. It's still kind of opaque and still has a little bit of body to it. It's not totally soft. Yeah.
So this will take several minutes, the adding of the butter. You don't rush the process. This is probably a moment where the technique is important.
Yes.
Don't rush the process or the mixture will not whip properly. And what texture are we aiming for with this addition of the butter?
So by the end, it should look like a buttercream frosting. And that is the key. So rather than mixing the butter and sugar together like we do with so many cookies, you start with the egg yolks and the sugar. And, there are a lot of tricks that people have tried to get that texture. And among them is using hard-boiled egg yolks, which is not the traditional way. I think there are other cookies in Italy that do use that technique. But I just think it makes the flavor a little off when you use hard-boiled egg yolks. And when I was watching Paola, I noticed that she mixed the egg yolks at length with the sugar and then added the butter a little bit at a time. Almost like if you were making panettone or brioche, when you need to keep that structure. So you add it just a very, a little bit. If you add it all at once, it won't turn out because you are looking for a very fluffy mixture.
Once all the butter is incorporated, and we're not going to rush that, we're going to switch to the paddle attachment, and we're going to add pastry flour and optional salt. So 2 questions. First, do you have a brand of pastry flour that you love? And also, why pastry flour as opposed to all-purpose?
Pastry flour because you want a low-protein flour. You don't want chewy cookies. You want them to have a very delicate texture. I will say sometimes I make it with half pastry flour and half all-purpose flour. It's basically a matter of preference, but traditionally it's a soft wheat type flour. I have a couple of brands I've used. I'm thinking Bob's Red Mill is one where I use their pastry flour. And then I use a flour from a Sicilian mill called Molino Ponte del Drago, I think. And I source this flour through an online purveyor, Gustiamo. They're based in the Bronx, and they import very high-quality Italian ingredients and food products. And so I think the texture of the flour matters for sure in these cookies, yeah.
And the salt, so interesting that it's optional. Like, did Paola put it in?
I don't believe she puts it in her cookies because I don't taste the salt when I taste them. And a lot of Italian cookies don't have salt in them. And I'm not sure what the reason is for that.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's just because of tradition and that some of these cookies date back, many generations or even centuries, as in the case of this one, maybe when salt wasn't, such a common ingredient. I'm not exactly sure why, but many Italian cookies don't have salt. But I need to have salt.
Yeah, I just think it pops flavor.
Absolutely, 100%.
Things taste, I'm a bit of a saltaholic, but baked goods taste so flat to me.
Yes.
Like you can tell if you forgot the salt, you're like, oh no.
Yeah.
You say fine salt. Is that fine sea salt? And do you ever use kosher salt when you bake?
I use fine sea salt. I use sea salt for everything. It's either coarse sea salt if I'm salting my pasta water, or sometimes I use coarse, like kosher salt for pasta water. But I just am a sea salt person. I've got a couple of different brands at my house. The one I'm thinking of is the French brand, the blue La Baleine.
Yes.
Yeah. So I tends to, because it's easy to find. Yeah.
So we're going to add the pastry flour and the salt all at once. We'll mix on low speed to incorporate. I love this verb, without kicking up any flour. I thought that was so cute. And then once the flour is mixed in, and are we trying to stop like when we just see the last streak disappear? We do not want to overmix at this point.
You don't want to overmix it, but you want to make sure it's well incorporated. So what I tend to do is just let it go, maybe 15, 30 seconds. So you can't see any more flour. And then I'll turn off the machine and I'll use a spatula to just go down to the bottom, because there's always a little bit of stuff at the bottom that doesn't get mixed in. And then I'll turn it back on just very briefly and incorporate that.
Yep. So now we'll scrape the dough onto a sheet of reusable wrap or plastic wrap.
Or parchment, or wax paper, whatever you want to
wrap.
Yeah.
Although would the paper seal it in enough in the refrigerator?
I think if you seal it well,
it'll be fine.
I tend to use the reusable wrap or plastic wrap.
Yep. We'll wrap tightly. What shape? Or
Is it
make a circle? You make a circle. We'll refrigerate it overnight. Is this rest for texture or is it for the ease of assembly? Or both?
It's for both. It's too soft to roll out immediately. It's spreadable almost. It's like you could pipe it at this point. And in fact, there are cookie recipes that call for piping the pasta frolla. So this is a pasta frolla dough, which is like a shortcut pastry dough, and there are many, many variations throughout Italy. I have a basic recipe in the book that you can use for a lot of the cookies in the book, but it's a little bit different than this one because the technique is different. And, almost every baker has her own version. But the word frolla comes from frollatura, which means aging. So you want to cure, quote unquote, this dough in the fridge. So frollatura is also used as a term, like for aging meat. So it's this process of letting the dough rest, and that gives the flour time to absorb whatever liquid is in there. And there's not much because it's just egg yolks and whatever liquid is in the butter. So you want that rest overnight, and also chilling it makes it, you can roll it out.
But you don't want to like do a 2-hour chill and then roll it out because the texture won't be.
You want to chill it overnight, yeah.
So then we'll remove the dough and the egg whites in the morning from the refrigerator. Let them sit at room temp for 30 minutes to warm up slightly. That'll just make it easier to roll out, I assume.
Yes.
Yeah. And then we'll heat the oven to 325 and line 2 rim baking sheets with parchment. 325 is low.
Yes, it is. And these cookies tend to be quite pale, but you want to make sure they're cooked through. So they're a little bit less than a centimeter, a little bit less than half an inch in height. So they do need time to set properly, but not brown too much on top. That's why the lower temperature. I will say, though, that a Genovese friend of mine kind of confirmed this for me. I like them cooked a little bit darker on top because you get that sort of caramelized sugar, that buttery flavor, toasted butter flavor. So I sometimes let them go a little bit longer, but traditionally they are supposed to be quite pale.
Now we're going to lightly flour. I assume with our pastry flour, we're not going to introduce all-purpose at this point.
You can use pastry flour. You can use all-purpose flour.
So we'll lightly flour our work surface. We'll lay our dough on it. We'll lightly flour the top of the dough. We're going to grab our rolling pin. Do you have a type or a brand of rolling pin that you like?
I have an old wooden rolling pin. It's the kind that spins. Mm-hmm. And I am just so used to that because that's the kind of rolling pin that I used when I was a little girl. And I have since bought, the French-style pins, and I even have a beautiful Italian, mattarello for pasta that I use. But I love the one that spins. It's so easy, and I have a lot of issues with repetitive strain injuries. So anything that makes, wrist work easy, I need it.
I do too.
Oh. Yeah.
So now we're going to roll the dough out to about 3/8 of an inch, just under a half inch. I assume we want to be slightly wary of introducing too much flour.
Yes, although I will say I don't like to throw away any dough, so I re-roll for the scraps until, even if I have just enough for one more cookie, I will roll it and shape it and bake it and eat it. And it doesn't, I think maybe those final ones may be a little more floury, but they are not at all unpleasant. They're all good. So I don't worry too much about the flour. You want to make sure that the dough doesn't stick to, to the countertop. And if you basically want a cold countertop if you can. If you have marble or granite or whatever, that's great. But obviously, whatever surface you have will work.
So now we're going to use a 2.5-inch 6-petal flour cookie cutter with a hole in the center to stamp out our cookies. Where would we get something like that?
Genoa. So, there are specific Canestrelletto di Torriglia cookie cutters, and I have it, but they're quite large. So 2.5 to 3 inches. They're pretty big. So I have a set of, I think they're a teco nesting flower shape, and it has 6 petals, but it doesn't have the little hole in the middle. So I use a zucchini corer, or you can use the wide side of a pastry tip, a piping tip, and you just can make the hole in the middle yourself. And when I make the cookies at home, I make smaller versions, and so I just punch out the hole myself. Yeah.
So then we're going to place 12 on each of our prepared baking sheets, leaving about a half inch between them. As you just said, you don't like to waste. So we're going to gather up our scraps, punched out centers, roll out more cookies to make sure we get our 24. And then we'll lightly beat those egg whites and brush the top of the cookies with it. Does that just add shine?
That basically just adds shine. Nowadays, the bakeries in Torriglia have quite a few variations of the cookie. They have them dipped in bittersweet chocolate. They have them dipped in white chocolate. Some of them are made with a little chestnut flour in the dough because there are a lot of chestnuts grown in that part of Liguria, or farro flour. There's a lot of whimsical variations now. But the classic version is, you use your 3 egg yolks for the dough. You're left with 3 egg whites, and that's what you use. So it's got that nice symmetry.
So we're going to bake 1 sheet of cookies at a time. I always only bake 1 at a time. Why?
Thank you.
Yes. Is that what you do for all your cookies, or is this, yeah?
Yes.
You have to,
Yes. I don't want to do upstairs, downstairs, rotate and all of that. No.
And also, my oven dropped, even with a nice oven, the temp drops too much if you have more than 1 sheet in there.
Yeah.
Thank you. So we're going to bake 1 sheet at a time for 25 to 30 minutes. That's long. And again, that's because it's the low heat.
Yes.
Yeah. Until set, golden, but not too brown. We'll transfer the baking sheets to wire racks, cool for 20 minutes, and then we'll repeat with the remaining sheets. You can serve with a dusting of confectioner sugar, and we will be serving because they sound so delicious.
Yeah, they really are.
Thank you so much for chatting with me today, Domenica, and I just want to say that you are my cherry pie.
Oh, those are the best words. Thank you, Jessie.
That's it for today's show. Don't forget to follow She's My Cherry Pie on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. And tell your pals about us. You can find today's recipe at cherrybomb.substack.com. She's My Cherry Pie is a production of the Cherry Bomb Podcast Network. Our producers are Carrie Diamond, Catherine Baker, and Jenna Sadu. Thank you so much for listening to She's My Cherry Pie, and happy baking.